Studies show that our surroundings have a profound impact on us. Just think about the 2017 study showing that overweight people, well, in fact, they have an impact on other people, so they become overweight as well. Well, remember, this is just a study because exactly the same study was done with people who are too thin. According to whatever the society is dictating these days, well, they impacted other people to be more thin. In fact, another study is showing that if you're spending time with a lot of old people, your mindset becomes old of age. All this to say that the surroundings have a profound impact on us. In fact, much more than we think. So my question to all of you guys out there is, does this have an impact on the work environment, how we decorate things, how we set up things, and how we build a culture? Well, today we have two remarkable experts on that very topic, and they will give us some insight, which I'm pretty sure you never heard about before. So let's run the M&M show. Hey everyone, welcome to all the viewers across the world, our viewers at the World Business Forum, and of course the viewers of the Chief Executive Magazine. My name is Martin Lindstrom. I'm your co-host, along with my dear friend and the very iconic Marshall Goldsmith. Marshall is the #1 executive coach in the world. I would almost claim he was the one inventing that very term. And on top of that, he's also an amazing author. In fact, guess what? On May the 3rd, which is a little bit less than a month from now, he's going to publish his next book called The Earned Life, Lose Regret, Choose Fulfillment, which will be published. And I tell you, it's absolutely amazing because Marshall, he sent me a book before it was launched. Don't tell anyone. So beside all these fancy credentials, I just want to say he's a remarkable human being. And I'm so proud, Marshall, once again, to spend time with you.
Oh, Martin, I am so honored to be here with my comrade, Martin Lindstrom. Martin has been ranked by Time magazine as one of the most 100 influential people in the world. Rumor has it he's entered into the galactic contest, but he's already listed in the world. He's the world's authority on branding. He is the author of Biology, the Ministry of Common Sense, and he also knows a lot about today's topic, perception. So I just can't wait to hear the dialogue today because we have such an interesting group. Martin is also, as I said, the most interesting human being I've ever met in my life. So he's just a fascinating human being. So such an honor to work with you. Yay.
Thank you, Marshall. And do you know what, everyone watching out there, I don't know how he does it, but every time I just blush when he's saying all this stuff, right? Because it couldn't be further from the truth. Oh, there we go. Listen, if you have any comments or questions out there, or you just want to share your view of what we're talking about, post them down here. And not only that, if you want to subscribe to the M&M show, you can do that by clicking the subscribe button, which is on the screen right now. And by the way, we also have an amazing website. I'm going to give you the link later on today where you can look at some of the past shows we had, which all of them in each of the way are remarkable, but not as unique as this show. Marshall, tell us about the first guest we have.
Look, I am so looking forward to today's show because I plan on learning a lot. Our first guest is Ellen Langer. Ellen has an amazing background. She's the first tenured psychology professor at Harvard, number one. She has been called the mother of mindfulness. She has 3 distinguished science awards. She is an author of Counterclockwise, which is a fascinating title, which we're going to talk about. And I could go on and on. She knows a lot about stuff. She knows a lot about the illusion of control. She knows about aging. She knows about decision making, and she knows about mindfulness. And as a Buddhist, I can't wait to hear her talk. So I'm very excited about both Anil, and I'm very excited about Ellen. Are we ready to begin?
We absolutely are. Welcome, Ellen, to our show. It's such an honor, really, to have you with us. Listen, Master, I know you have a question for Ellen.
Yes. My first question is, you're one of the leading authorities. In fact, you've been called the mother of mindfulness. How'd you get into this? And tell us what it means, and just give us a little primer for the audience.
Well, I think that I first started studying mindlessness. And, I would walk into a mannequin and I would say, I'm sorry, things of this sort. I moved from New York to Cambridge to begin teaching at Harvard. Right. And Cambridge was a very different place from New York. So if you went to park if let's say the banks at that time were closed at 3 o'clock. In New York at 3:01, the spaces by the bank would all be taken. But in Cambridge, no. You'd go into a bank itself and you'd have one line have 10 people on it and another line only 2 people. In New York, that would never happen. The people 10 would run to the other and, to move things along. And so a number of things like this just led me to see what I found after all these years was that virtually all of us are mindless almost all the time. We're not there. And the fun thing is that because we're not there to know we're not there. So people, by and large, are oblivious. And to be truthful, Martin, at one point, I was talking to somebody, not the nice kind of person, the way you described Martin, and the person said something like, you are what you study, some version of that. And so I flipped it. So instead of studying mindlessness, I started studying mindfulness. But my mindfulness is very different in approach from the Buddhist fashion you were talking about a moment before. Although interestingly, you end up in the same place. So mindfulness, as I study it, is the very simple process of noticing new things. That's all it is. Now, when you notice new things, you see, hey, I didn't know this as well as I thought I knew it. So then your attention naturally goes to it. And so we have people actively notice, and the results are remarkable over, I've been doing this a lot of years, so there's almost no dependent measure we haven't put in there. But as you actively notice, the neurons start firing, you become, you live longer, you become healthier, more alert, more engaged, more charismatic, your memory improves, virtually everything, which is kind of amazing. And we have a lot of new data that maybe we'll get to or not, that about how my mindfulness actually affects your mindfulness.
Wow.
even
It's
as a
extraordinary interesting what you're saying, Ellen. No, you said one comment which where you lived longer, and one of the first times I heard about you was with this unusual experiment done many years ago, where you actually took people back in time.
yeah.
Now, rather than me trying to explain it for the viewers, why don't we run a little snippet from a BBC documentary, probably one of the most remarkable BBC documentaries ever produced. Take a look at this.
Nobody likes getting older, but we all know you can't turn back time. Well, what if you could? What if it were possible to simply think yourself young again? We've transformed this country house into an authentic 1970s time capsule. Inside, it might look like the set of a classic sitcom, but actually, it's a science lab. We're using it to restage an extraordinary experiment first carried out 30 years ago, which suggested that reliving your youth can make you young again. Going back in time will be 6 well-loved famous faces, all now in their 70s and 80s. Mr. Showbiz, Lionel Blair.
I'm still here. Is all I can say.
Britain's favourite Nana, actress Liz Smith. And star of the silver screen, Sylvia Sims.
Oh, by the way, I've got no money, so I can't pay you today.
Umpiring legend Dickie Bird.
I've gone past it nearly every day.
Media mogul Derek Jameson.
Well, the trouble with today's papers, they're like comics, aren't they?
And the first ever on-screen BBC newsreader, Kenneth Kendall.
What? I recently discovered my friend Kenneth Kendall passed away. He was in his 90s, and I believe it had a good run. What?
We'll be getting them to work, rest and play.
I'm cheating. I'm cheating.
Drink, dance and dress.
It's a great shirt.
As though they're back in 1975.
You're a fascist.
I'm a communist, actually.
Communist.
To see if being old is all in the mind.
Lizzie, how old are you? Very soon. I will be 89. Oh, my goodness me.
Could just 1 week in this experiment make them fitter,
This will bring back so much to me.
healthier
You're at the Palladium.
All right.
and even younger?
When you're young at heart. Something in the throat.
Or will it prove too much?
I can't do this.
I'm really bored with it now.
Wow. Ellen, you were the one creating the foundation for this very idea. What was the outcome?
Well, the outcome was very similar to the actual experiment. People were able to do all sorts of things that they thought they couldn't do. But let me tell you the results that we actually found when we did this as an experiment. So the most important, I think, was bringing people back, having them live as if they're the younger selves. These are people in their 80s, 90. Their vision improved, their hearing improved, their memory improved, their strength improved, and they looked noticeably younger. And that I was thrilled with this because, again, this was without any medical intervention. And then I started to think about it afterwards. I mean, have you ever heard of an elder person vision improving, hearing improving? And so we've done several studies since that time. It's all to test. I don't know if I should get into this, so feel free to stop me. But this idea of mind-body unity. This mind-body, these are just words. Let's put them back together. And if we put them back together, then wherever we put the mind, we're necessarily putting the body. So we have lots of studies now where we put the mind in unusual places and take the measurements from the body. And this counterclockwise study was the first instance of this, first test of this theory.
And the mind-body concept, people talk today about work-life balance. I know you think this is rubbish, right?
Well, it's not rubbish. The world starts off here, and then somebody improves it to here, and then people think, well, that's as good as it gets. And in my mind, almost always there's a better place. So if one is stressed and all they're doing is their work, surely to introduce some fun, some, as we're calling life, as opposed to work, is better than that. But to me, one should strive for work-life integration, so that people like your guests here, you and I, Martin, I'm sure, are virtually the same, whether we're at work or play. And I think that the pandemic, is one of the positive aspects of the pandemic, is that while people are Zooming from home, there are things that are just going to happen. The dog starts barking, the kids walk in, and that somehow makes one come to realize perhaps that they can be themselves and still accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. So right now, people start off believing work has to be stressful. And if work is awful in any way, then you need something to balance that. And, no matter what you're doing, whether you're working, eating a sandwich, doing a podcast, you can do it mindfully or mindlessly. And as I said before, the consequences of doing it mindfully are enormous. And so one can bring all of that to their work.
Now, I've got to, number one, I've got to quote you on this. Almost all of us are mindless almost all of the time. I love that, number one.
Yeah.
So I'm going to quote you on that. I love that. Number two, I measure every day. I have this daily question process I do every day. One of my questions is, what % of the day was I mindful? Now, my average is probably 25 or 30%, which is probably mostly bullshit. It's probably actually much worse than that, but at least that's what score I give myself. And so I'm always looking for ways to, I coach people, so I'm always looking for ways to help people. I love your term, actively notice. Now, again, just all of our listeners, give us an idea of how just everybody like you, all of us can be actively noticing. A little tip or two would be helpful.
Yeah. No, so if you're living with somebody, notice 3-5 ways they're different at this moment than they were yesterday. You go outside, what's new, and very subtle differences. It doesn't matter if the difference is big, small, but as long as it's new for you, you then tune back in. And this active noticing is important because most of the time we think we know. And when we think we know, there's no reason to pay any attention. So I often start lectures with a very simple thing. And I just ask people, as I'll ask you, Martin, how much, Marsh, how much is 1 + 1?
Yeah, 2.
Yeah, no, not always though. Okay, now, that's right. If you are adding 1 pile of laundry to 1 pile of laundry, 1 + 1 is 1. You're adding 1 cloud plus 1 cloud, 1 + 1 is 1, and so on. And so to get people to say, wow, this thing that I knew better than anything else could be wrong. Perhaps everything else that I think is wrong some of the time. And this all came to me. I was at this horse event. This man asked me, could I watch his horse because he was going to get his horse a hot dog. A hot dog. Horses don't eat meat. He comes back with the hot dog and the horse ate it. And it was at that moment that I realized everything I think I knew could be wrong. Right? And so when you don't know, so you can either become mindful by this active noticing, or by recognizing, after as many examples as you individually need, that uncertainty is not the exception. Uncertainty is the rule. Everything is changing. Everything looks different from different perspectives. So you can't know. And when you approach a situation as if you don't know it, then you naturally tune in. So the act of noticing is to show you that you don't know, or you can start off knowing you don't know. In either case, that puts you in the present to take advantage of all sorts of opportunities to which you'd otherwise be blind.
And Ellen, this reminds me about some of your work where you're saying you should not set goals for yourself because then you actually set limits and restrictions for your own mind, which is exactly what you're talking about right now. Now, coming up, our next guest will prove how we all completely manipulated by perception in just 30 seconds. Now, that's just down the alley of what we've been talking about here. And our guest is Anil Kumar. He's actually one of the leading professors in neuroscience. He's also behind numerous of experiments about perception. Now, Anil is also the author of the publishing sensation, which is called Being You, a New Science of Consciousness. It's actually a Sunday Times bestseller. Anil, such a great pleasure to have you on the show today.
Hi, Martin. It's a great pleasure to be with you. I should just say my surname is Seth, not Kumar. That's my middle name, but that's quite
Oh my gosh, how can I say things like this? everyone just make sure that you're not listening to my perception, because the reality is Anil. Right? You see, this is the perception.
Yeah, exactly. You
all
had
have,
it.
right?
You've been guided by your expectations.
Yeah,
Too strongly
exactly.
already.
Listen, I just want to ask you one question here. What is perception and how does the brain do it?
Well, the second bit is very, very difficult to answer. We're still neuroscientists and psychologists still working on this very hard. But what is perception is itself a fascinating question, because I think most of us take it for granted, right? We wake up in the morning, we open our eyes, and the world just seems to pour itself into our mind transparently, as if there's nothing special going on. We just open ourselves to the world and there it is. You know, Alan was saying it's all about noticing things, training ourselves to notice what's going on. This is really hard because it doesn't seem like we have to. It seems like the world just presents itself to us. And in fact, a common way to study and think about perception is that the brain sort of reads out the world from sensory information that flows into the eyes, into the ears, through the skin when you touch things, and that there's like a little you, a mini me inside my skull, the self, that is the recipient of all this information, that is doing the perceiving. Now, a long tradition in philosophy and neuroscience, and the tradition that I'm working on too, turns that on its head. And it suggests that what we perceive doesn't come so much from the outside in, but from the inside out. And that the self isn't this thing that does the perceiving. The self is itself a kind of perception. What my work has been about is thinking of the brain as a kind of prediction machine. So it's always generating predictions about the causes of sensory signals. We don't have direct access to what sound is. Generating predictions about the causes of sensory signals.
So tell me, Anil, how I was just interrupting you rudely just a couple of minutes ago, but tell me, how can we use this insight, this observation in the real world, in work environments, or just how we are as human beings?
I think it's fundamentally quite similar to what Alan was saying. It's firstly just the process of recognizing, of acknowledging that the way we perceive things is not necessarily the way they are. You know, it's not just given to us by the sensory information that comes into our eyes. It depends on the interpretations that our brains make of it. And where do these interpretations come from? If it's a basic sort of visual illusion effect, like the first thing there with the gray colored squares, you know, the brain just has that wiring built into its cortex, and there's very little we can do about it. The brain expects things to behave differently under shadows. But the other example is interesting because it shows how quickly our perceptions can change when we change our expectations, and our expectations are changing all the time. And actually, Ellen and I were talking just before the show that once you've heard it, you can't unhear it. And this shows that there's a sort of a one directionality to this. We have to be very careful to curate the kinds of expectations we have. So in everyday life, I think this is important. I walk around the world and I'm always just reminding myself that the way I see things, it doesn't mean that it's all made up, but it means that it's a kind of constructive dance of interpretation between the brain and the world. And the other important lesson, I think, is that other people might do it differently. Because the world that I see seems to be real in all its elements, it's very hard for me to understand that other people in the same situation might actually be having a different experience. And I think we're getting used to the idea now that of external diversity. We all differ in height and skin color and so on, but there's this hard to see because it's all private and subjective. There's just as much inner diversity as there is outer diversity. And when we recognize that, I think it will allow us to engage with people, understand them much better. And that can be useful in work, in life, and as Alan said, in our integrated work-life experience.
I just love this. I'm going to do just a brief experiment. Are either of you in a room with a Roman numeral watch or a clock?
No.
No.
I'm outside.
I have a clock.
Well, it's Roman numerals?
No.
If you're in, fascinating, take someone who has a Roman numeral watch or a clock, and you ask them, what does the 4 look like? And 90% of the time it's 4 eyes. And 80% of the people will say IV. I've done this with people that own the same watch 40 years and looked at it every day and couldn't see it. This is, Anil, back to your point. We see what's there. We don't see what's there. We see what we think is there, our perception. Now, Anil, I want to get your thoughts on another thing. I mean, I could listen to you guys talk forever. In my job as a coach, I didn't get paid if my clients didn't get better. A very unique billing system. No pay, no improvement, no pay. Better is not judged by my client. It's judged by the people around my client. In other words, Anil, their perception had to change before I could get paid. So what I really learned is I have to involve them in the process, because if I don't, even if the behavior of my clients changed, they wouldn't see that it changed, because they would put them in this same stereotypical box, and they would just wait for them to screw up, even if they, even if they didn't screw up. Like, I'll just give you a quick example. Let's say my problem is I make too many destructive comments about people. Well, I picked that. It sounds simple. Just quit doing it. The problem's gone. You're my colleague. I go 7 months and never make one bad comment. 7 months later, I say, idiots in finance, blah, blah, blah. His first reaction is, Marshall never changed. Marshall has never changed. The 7 months is gone. That will reconfirm that perception or stereotype. So, Anil, just a couple of quick suggestions from you I would love. How can the listeners really take what you've learned and really help people change others' perceptions of them? For example, the people we love. In many ways, the closer we are to another person, the harder it is to change perception, because the deeper the stereotype is.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. That is a big challenge. But I think you yourself hinted at the solution to that, which is that you have to be flexible with the context too. Because the context that we're in, this situation that we're in, the environment we're in, you can think of that as just a whole set of other expectations that shape what we perceive. We'll perceive things in different ways depending on the surroundings, and we may not realize that that's what we're doing. So if you want to bring out some change that's happened or that you think you've made, then by sort of altering the context to reveal that, I think that in that way you do stand a chance of having people able to overcome their perceptual habits. I like to think in terms of perceptual habits, just as we have behavioral habits.
Right.
And to break a perceptual habit, you have to not just change the actions you do, you've got to change the context in which you do them.
Okay, coming up, can perception change our workplace? Now, this is a question we're going to ask our panel, and the best way of doing that is to go even further and have an expert from Microsoft ask the question. So because of that, and with no further ado, let me introduce you to Catherine Hinkle, which is General Manager at Microsoft, and she will run today's BCG Minute. Let's roll the minute.
Hi, I'm Catherine Hinkle, and I'm the General Manager of Microsoft in Switzerland. I would like to know, with all of the leadership discussions, how does technology that becomes so predominant in our workspace and interaction with our customers, interaction with our people, how does that change leadership? I'm really looking forward to your answer.
Whoa, not an easy challenge here. Would like to go for Ellen. Do you have some views on this?
No, but I'll try anyway. That talking about leadership, so that you have different views of leadership. Leadership can be a function of skill or a function of inherited leadership, and so on and so forth. And so if what's happened is machines have taken over the place of people, what is the task you want the leader to accomplish? Now, we did some research that probably too long to go into. Well, I'll tell you anyway, just very briefly. We had orchestras playing mindfully or mindlessly. And then we had people evaluate the performances, and everybody preferred, 90% of the people preferred the mindfully played pieces. And when I was writing that up, which initially was just about music and mindfulness, I realized how it spoke to leadership. Here, it was very strange that you had superior coordinated performance with everybody doing their own thing. And so whether it's with machines, technology, or in any other environment, I believe that probably the best way to lead is to encourage other people's mindfulness, rather than the way many people lead now is with the belief that we know and therefore you have to do A, B, and C. And what people need to realize that everything they know was based on yesterday, not tomorrow, not even today. So you want to stop using yesterday's solutions to solve today's problems. And I believe also speaks to the last thing you were talking about. If you assume that behavior makes sense from the actor's perspective, or else the actor wouldn't do it, then all of our negative judgments of people would change, and we'd have more respect for those people that we're pushing around at work, for example. But also that would deal with the situation Anil was speaking to, that the way to change somebody's interpersonal interaction is not to say, all right, I'll tolerate the fact that you're behaving intolerably, or I'll try to, recontextualize it. It probably would be to recognize that that behavior has potentially many understandings. You may have no respect for me because I'm so gullible. But when you realize behavior makes sense from my perspective, or else I wouldn't do it, you see that I'm trusting. I can't stand you, Martin. You're so inconsistent. But from your perspective, you're being flexible, and so on. So rather than change the behavior, get the individual to understand the behavior differently. And then there's nothing to change. You don't want me not to be trusting. I don't want you not to be flexible.
It's funny, Ellen, as you're saying this, because it reminds me about one of our clients, which is Maersk. It's the largest shipping company in the world. And we were there when the cyber attack happened, which actually supposedly was the biggest cyber attack happening on any company. Think about this, 88,000 staff were impacted, 25% of all trade were impacted. Now, here's the interesting thing. As we were walking through the offices where nothing happened, the computers were down, the phones did not work, the emails were gone, then people, of course, went into panic for a couple of hours. And then what happened was the leaders stepped up. Suddenly they were walking down the hallways twice a day. People actually had this open door policy, which certainly was real and not just something they were saying. And what was remarkable, after the cyber attack, 6 or 7 weeks later, I went around the world and interviewed a lot of people and spent time with thousands of Maersk employees and asked them, how was it? And they all said to me, nearly all said to me, it was like the old Maersk had returned. We had a spirit, we're sticking together. And this is back to what you're saying. Suddenly they were mindful, but not only that, technology was not driving the outcome. They used certainly technology as a tool, but it was not the opposite way, which I think is really a consequence of our world today, right?
Yes, I agree with that.
Anil, any reflections?
Yeah, my thinking was along the same lines that you were saying. I think we all recognize that technology can be both a great facilitator, as it is now. We're all having this lovely conversation from different parts of the world, but it can also be a barrier. And there are many ways in which it can be a barrier. And I think one of them is if in the hope of making things easier for us, it removes some of our autonomy and sort of it funnels our actions, our perceptions, our behaviors in particular ways. And so we don't feel that we have so much control over what we're doing. And of course, that can be a big problem for then inspiring behavior in other people and changing what they might do. So that's how technology, I think, can often become a problem. But reverting also back to what Alan was saying, I really think that there's a lot in recognizing from a leadership perspective, the importance of understanding what people are doing, why they're doing, and indeed how they're perceiving it. So some of the discussions I've had with other people in corporate environments, one of the things leaders often want to do is create change. You know, they have this vision for what people should do, and there are good reasons for doing it, but people don't do it, or they don't seem to do it. But there's another phenomenon about perception that might be at play here, and it's called change blindness. And this is the phenomenon that if things change slowly, or to Alan's point, if we're not noticing the things while they're changing, we often don't perceive them as changing at all. And this can work both ways. It might be the fact that things are actually changing, but that change is not experienced either by individuals or by the collective or by the institution. So I think there has to be better ways of actually bringing people's attention to change itself as part of how we experience our worlds and our lives.
That was the hardest part of all of these disasters that have occurred, or even the pandemic that we're still in, is people have difficulty. How are we going to deal with life now? With the mistaken understanding that everything was predictable before this. Prediction is an illusion. And so I think that this is maybe complicated, but people, once people need to think they can predict because they take outcomes in a single-minded way. So right now, people believe I have to get this thing that's good, I have to avoid this thing that's bad. And when they recognize that how good or bad it is in your head, it's not in the thing you're evaluating, then you don't have to be pulled this way and that way. And then you can accept that you don't know, and that not knowing is exciting. You know, sort of imagine it, you know, it'd be like Groundhog's Day. You saw the movie where everything is the same if you know it. People who are entering contests, competing, who think all they want is to win. But if you want that, and you're however old anybody is who's listening, go play a game against a 5-year-old. You'll always win. So we really don't want lots of the things that we think we do want. And recognizing that everything is changing and looks different from different perspectives, then what we need to do is make a universal attribution for not knowing. Right now, people say, I don't know, maybe you know, so I'll pretend. And so there's a lot of that in industry. Everybody afraid because they think they're supposed to know, and which keeps everybody mired in the past rather than forward looking. So instead, it should be, I don't know, you don't know, let's all look at the same time. Perhaps your particular bent will lead you to know this or that faster, different from what would come to my mind.
Now, what an amazing way of wrapping this show. I guess in a second or two, it's time to run the Mule summary. But before we do that, any reflections, Marshall?
Yeah, a couple of reflections. One, one of our sponsors is Chief Executive Magazine. And my daughter Kelly and I just wrote an article in the magazine. And, you know, it reminds me of something that came up here. Leaders today are much nicer than they've ever been in history, at least in most of the Western world, yet they're perceived as being worse. Why? Part of this is change blindness. Why? There are more complaints about leaders now. Well, of course, the standards are much higher than they've ever been before. People expect more. In the old days, all you had to do is kiss the butt of everybody or else you got killed. Well, it's a different world today. So it is interesting, this concept of change blindness. And then Ellen said, I love this idea of actively noticing.
Well, change blindness is really just mindlessness. And, you know, so mindless, you're just oblivious to everything except the view that Anil showed. These two squares are different. 1 and 1 is 2, and so on. I'm sorry.
Oh,
I didn't mean to interrupt. I meant to interrupt, but I didn't mean to appear that I was interrupting.
All good. It's all good. It's all good. So, you know, and you know, Ellen, I love what you're doing. I'm the ultimate agnostic. My answer to almost all questions in life is I don't have a clue. Yeah. So at least it's nice to give me someone there to give us on show that has a very smart person giving me some validation to justify the fact that I have no idea what's going on about anything. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, listen, thank you. Well, listen, Marshall, isn't that life that none of us know what we're doing? We're just pretending. Isn't there saying that in the world of blind people is the one-eyed, which is running this show? Well, there's a lot of one-eyed on this show, perhaps even two-eyed. Certainly, I would say there's 2 sets of them, and that's Ellen Langer, which is, in my opinion, one of the most iconic people out there. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. And of course, we have Anil Seth, which, and I hope I'm pronouncing the name right. See, none of you will ever forget this show now because I'm doing this mistake here. But listen, I think it's time for us to run straight into the Mule summary. So let's run it now. Gee, I tell you one thing. I have picked up so many things. It's not even funny. So I just have to go into my notebook here and look at what I would like to say as a summary. First of all, I love what Anil was saying. He talked about the little interpreter we have inside our brain, which is almost like translating what we see before it drives into our consciousness. And that's the reason why perception is so prominent. He also, by the way, said that we are seeing the world not from outside in, but from the inside out, because we're actually seeing almost like this movie running in our little head. I love the term actively noticing, which is the idea about that we are much more mindful in our life. And then, Anil, by the way, you talked about the inner diversity. Wow, what a term. We're not just talking about diversity anymore. It's an inner diversity because we see the world differently. It's not necessarily visible what we're seeing. Then we have change blindfulness, the whole idea that we're blind and we actually are not necessarily seeing change, particularly when it's happening very slowly. And then, you also talked about how prediction is an illusion. Wow, talk about all this stuff. Now, I have to do a mule summary. So this is super difficult. So here's what I would like to do. I'd like to interpret what I've learned into a little model. First of all, give people choices as it create mindfulness. I think that the more we start to give people choices, the more mindful we become. And that's sort of the first path. And I know one of the experiments Ellen Langer did was exactly that with senior people. If they were given no choices, they died quicker, literally. If they were given more choices, they were part of it and owned the process. Now, it also meant that you have to systematically eliminate things which causes you to suffer. We are suffering so much every day right now. And I think the issue is, let's eliminate that. Let's not just focus on all the bad sides. Let's one by one remove it. In fact, there's a friend of mine which did that. He was always slightly anxious when he was going to work. He realized the reason why was because he'd not planned out his way of getting there, because he had to find a car every morning and sometimes it was not there because it was a rental car. So he limited that. Once he did that, he said to me, do you know what? I feel relieved. It's small frictions you're removing. Now, going even further, don't establish false limits as they become your limits. That's what Ellen Langer is talking a lot about, that they should not set these goals because it really restricts you. Now, that leads to the second part of it. How do I do it? That's the question you have to ask rather than how can I do it? How can I do it at all? You're restricting yourself by asking the question the wrong way. Go even further towards the mindfulness. Don't compare. No, it sets you up. If you compare to experts out there, well, they're good because they've been around forever. They fine-tuned the art of saying things the perfect way. And suddenly you're setting yourself up and it becomes suddenly something pulling you back from evolving. Last but not least, approach challenges as a game, not as a duty. It basically means that you're actually exploring things, playing with things. And by the way, that's the reason why some of the most successful companies are succeeding, because they're working with gaming theories rather than just working with work. And we will have two people who are experts on that on the next show. I won't tell you more, but I guess that's the summary, the mule summary. Wow. So here we go. Listen, if you want to check out some of the future or past shows, go into martinlindstrom.com/mm// again. You have the graphics on the screen right now. And here you'll find a summary of all the shows, video clips, all the goodies. Plus, if you want to go into Boston Consulting Group or Mule, Chief Executive Magazine or World Business Forum, you can see a lot of their programming, books, and tools. I guess this is the show today. Listen, Marshall, first of all, thank you so much for all your amazing inspiration. It's clear for me that we had some guests on the show today, which really made all of us think. And I just want to say that on the next show, the 3rd of May, we have Dr. John Mader on our show, which is the Chief Technology Officer of Everbridge. He's also an American technologist and designer who's explored all sorts of aspects around human technology. He's remarkable. And we also have a surprise guest, which I won't announce yet, but you will love it. That is the 3rd of May at 12 o'clock noon Eastern. And until then, stay safe and see you very soon again. Take care. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Every day is a new challenge, right? Is a day that we can prepare ourselves even more.
This is about leadership as a mindset.
We do work that matters for people who care.
We live in the age of the idea.